I wanted to talk a little bit more about where I came from, which was, again, New Jersey, near New York, in the United Snakes of America. I was in a little town. It had a suburban area, which was wealthy. In fact, Short Hills, New Jersey, which is what it was called, was the third wealthiest part of America at that time. And 22 miles away, or 3 hours by car, was Manhattan Island. And there were 7 million people living on Manhattan Island at the time, and 7 million more came to work in the morning. So that was the entire population of Australia when I arrived here in 1974. So it was a different world than here. It was even a different world than all the cities you have here. I got to see some of New York. The school system I went to actually took children to various places. We went to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. We went to the Guggenheim Art Museum. We went to the Natural History Museum of New York. And I had 3 older brothers. Most of them left home as soon as they could, and which happens in many homes where there's an alcoholic man. And a few years ago, there was a movie put out, trying to remember the name of it. I had it in a moment ago in my head. Gump, Forrest Gump. And I wondered when I saw that movie whether someone had met me in my college years, because that man reminded me a little bit of myself. This book comes from that town. I actually brought it with me, and its cover is almost worn out. It's Edible Wild Plants of Eastern North America, and I encountered it when I was about 8 or 10 years old, and I found it quite interesting. There's a lot more plants in here than I saw even then when I went looking for them. And the fact that some of them were edible was remarkable. In fact, all of these are edible, and the Indians of those areas would have eaten them. And that stimulated my interest in economic plants, or edible plants, or useful plants, and that's pretty much what my nursery is based on. The paper cover of this one is damaged, but it's Wild Foods of Australia by A.B. and J.W. Cribb. Many people are familiar with it. It's now 30 years old or so. But like this first one, it's about edible wild plants. Back on the table that you looked at before, briefly, there's Sturtevant's Edible Plants of the World, and that's a Dover reprint. Some of the information in there is 500 years old, extracted from other texts, and it attempts to list every edible plant on the planet. There are other books, of course, on the subject, and I would have 20,000 books in my own library. They're not very well organized, and I have not read them all, but I do spend time with some of them. It's about Christmas time at the moment. I still want to talk about New Jersey a little, and that is, they were different times than we live now. I was born in '49. I grew up in the '50s. I saw some television for a few years, but mostly I didn't get to see much television because I had jobs to do. My older brothers also went to school and had jobs after school, and then they went off and did other things. The day I turned 14, which was then legal to work, I had already had 8 or 10 jobs, but I started my first full-time work, and that was in an off-Broadway theater on our block, 100 meters from my home. There were Broadway shows that came, and I worked there 7 nights a week, from 7 o'clock in the evening till 11 o'clock at night, all day Saturday from 7 a.m. until the next 1 a.m. I think there's laws against that now, but I would probably disobey them if you gave me a chance. It was a wonderful job. I worked more than 40 hours a week and still went to school at the same time. Like that movie Forrest Gump, and I have read the book, when I was in school, in just state school, I read the story of Roger Bannister, who was the first man as far as we know, who ran a 4-minute mile, who could run a mile in less than 4 minutes. And as a child, he had had rheumatic fever, and he almost died. And they thought he would not recover. They thought he would not be able to walk again. His heart was damaged. But he wanted to walk, and he struggled to do it, and before long he could walk. And then he wanted to run, and he ran. And then he ran everywhere he could go to run. And like him, I had some difficulties, and I had a bicycle at some point, and I used it, and I certainly had my feet. And I used to do some running. In fact, when I was a little bit older, I practiced what's called Indian running. Some of the native tribes of America used to run messages over long distances. They used moccasins on their feet, and about that time I stopped wearing shoes except when it was required. So I used to run long distance barefoot, sort of like a marathon, often no set limit. I did not participate much in the school apart from studying things, but I did do cross country as a sport, and found that nice, but I had no interest in beating other people. I just liked running, and I liked being fit. And two of my brothers were athletes. One of them was the athlete of the year in our school, and he went on to do some amazing things, including canoeing all the way down the Mississippi from Minnesota down to New Orleans. And he did the river a second time in a slightly larger boat, and he's traveled all around the world and done things. Here's one place he hasn't been. This is an actual photo of the planet Mars. This is from the year 2010. A friend who is a pilot sent me this astronomy calendar for that year, and it was just a reminder that I, as a child, was interested in the stars. You couldn't hardly see them where I lived because there was so much light, so many people, so much smog. At an early age, I was aware of the problems of the world. The UN was dealing with them, and there were people who were concerned and wished to solve the problems of the children of the world and the nations of the world and the warfare that was taking place. And I took an interest in those things. Nuclear weapons had been created, and they were used the first time in 1945. I studied them before I was even 10 years old, and I read a couple of the texts when I was 12 and 13 and 14, and I demonstrated against nuclear weapons. I also went to demonstrations trying to raise consciousness in regards race of black and white people in America and women's liberation. And I was interested in lots of the music that occurred at that time. I got to meet a few interesting people. This is another photo. Don't think you can really catch it on your film. It doesn't really matter, but this photo was made using the Hubble Space Telescope, and the Hubble was pointed at an area in space in which our light telescopes could see nothing. And it was given an exposure of 1 million seconds, which is 11 point something days. And what they found is a whole lot of stuff where nothing could be seen before. And the really remarkable thing about this picture is that there's only 4 individual stars in the picture. All the other objects, and there are hundreds of them, are galaxies of stars. Now, I've studied astronomy formally at the university, and I studied this planet. I've studied its formation. I studied the origin of life. I studied lots and lots of things. And I did that rather than drink, or rather than chase a football, or even chase women.